What would you sacrifice to save the one you love? Isabella was a broke musician with a dying brother and no one left to turn to. Marcus Stone was a dying billionaire desperate to leave behind more than just his empire. One needed money, the other needed a child. But what neither of them expected was how this deal would uncover secrets that could shatter them both. Stay with us to hear how one decision changed everything. If powerful stories of love, loss, and redemption move you, don't forget to hit that like button, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. We love connecting with you. And be sure to subscribe so you never miss a twist, a heartbreak, or a redemption like this one. Rain hammered against the windows of the 65th floor in the Phoenix corporate tower like bullets against glass. Inside his corner office, Marcus Stone sat frozen in his leather chair, staring at the medical report that had just destroyed his world. At 32, he was one of Chicago's youngest billionaires, a man who had built an empire from nothing after growing up in foster care. But tonight, all his power meant nothing. Brain tumor. Terminal. 6 to 18 months. His hands shook as he read the words again. Marcus had always believed that money could solve any problem, by any solution. He'd spent his life proving that Marcus Stone from the South Side orphanage could conquer anything. But death? Death didn't care about his bank account. The irony cut deep. He'd spent years building Stone Industries to prove he mattered, to show the world that the unwanted foster kid could become somebody. Now he'd die alone, just another forgotten rich man whose money would scatter to distant relatives who barely knew his name. "I need an heir," he whispered to the empty room, his voice echoing off the cold glass walls. "Someone to carry my blood when I'm gone. Someone to prove I existed." But Marcus Stone had never let anyone close enough to love him. Trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. Not after being abandoned by every family who was supposed to care for him. Love was weakness, and weakness meant being thrown away again. Across town in a cramped apartment in South Side Chicago, 24-year-old Isabella Martinez knelt beside her younger brother's hospital bed, her calloused fingers, worn from years of playing piano in dive bars to pay rent, gently stroking Diego's fevered forehead. At 15, Diego was her whole world, the only family she had left since their parents died in a car crash 3 years ago. Isabella had sacrificed everything for her little brother. She'd given up her scholarship to Juilliard, sold her grandmother's antique piano, and worked 3 jobs to keep them afloat. But Diego's rare blood cancer was a monster that devoured money faster than she could earn it. The experimental treatment he needed cost more than she'd make in 10 lifetimes. "Bella," Diego whispered, his voice barely audible, "you don't have to stay. I know you had dreams." But the stack of unpaid medical bills on her kitchen table told a different story. She'd already sold everything except her old acoustic guitar, the last piece of her musical dreams. Tomorrow, even that would have to go. Her phone buzzed. An unknown number. "Miss Martinez? This is James Patterson, attorney for Mr. Marcus Stone. We have a proposition that could save your brother's life." Isabella's heart raced. She'd heard of Marcus Stone. Everyone in Chicago had. The mysterious billionaire who never appeared in society pages, who built his empire from shadows and silence. What kind of proposition? $5 million. In exchange for carrying Mr. Stone's child. The phone nearly slipped from her trembling hands. $5 million would save Diego. It would give him the best doctors, the best treatment, a real chance at life. But the cost? Her eyes fell on Diego's pale face, on the tubes keeping him alive, on the machines beeping his heartbeat into the sterile hospital air. How could she put a price on his life? How could she not? "I need time to think," she managed to say. "You have 24 hours. Your brother doesn't have longer than that." The meeting happened in a sterile conference room at Stone Industries, 60 floors above the streets where Isabella had grown up. The building itself seemed designed to intimidate, all black glass and steel, reaching toward the sky like a monument to power. Marcus sat at the head of the polished table, and Isabella understood immediately why people feared him. He wasn't just handsome in the way rich men often were. He was beautiful like a blade, sharp and dangerous. His steel-gray eyes showed no warmth, no humanity. He wore a black suit that made him look more like death than a man offering life. Isabella walked in wearing her only decent coat, a thin jacket that couldn't hide her nervous trembling. She'd spent the night researching him, finding only business articles and cold facts. No personal life, no relationships, no friends. Marcus Stone was a ghost who happened to own half of Chicago. He pushed a thick contract across the table without even greeting her, without acknowledging her as a human being. The terms are simple. His voice was ice-cold, each word carefully controlled. You'll live in my estate during the pregnancy. Carry the child to term. Give birth. I'll pay $5 million when the baby is delivered. Your brother's medical bills are covered immediately. I've already spoken to his doctors. Isabella's hands trembled as she read the contract. The legal language was brutal in its clarity. No emotional attachment to the child. No rights beyond the agreed payment. No contact with the child after delivery. Complete confidentiality regarding all personal matters. She looked up at him, searching his face for any trace of humanity. What am I to you? She asked quietly. Just a baby machine? Marcus's lips curved into a smile that held no warmth. You're part of a business transaction, Miss Martinez. I need an heir. You need money. It's a simple exchange. Do your job. Get paid. Don't expect anything more. His words were designed to hurt, to reduce her to nothing more than a service provider. But Isabella caught something else in his voice, a tremor, so slight she almost missed it. This man was dying, and he was just as scared as she was. Isabella thought of Diego lying in that hospital bed, his weak smile when she read him stories, his dreams of becoming an artist. She thought of their parents, who had taught her that family was everything, that love was worth any sacrifice. I have conditions, she said, surprising herself with her steady voice. Marcus raised an eyebrow. You're not in a position to negotiate. I am if you want this baby to be healthy, Isabella shot back, finding her strength. I need to know I can call my brother every day. I need to know he's okay, and I won't be treated like a prisoner in your house. For a moment, something flickered in Marcus's cold eyes. Surprise, maybe even respect. Fine, but everything else stays the same. Isabella picked up the pen with shaking hands. As she signed her name, she felt like she was signing away a piece of her soul. But when she thought of Diego, she whispered to herself, I'll survive this. For him, I'll survive anything. Marcus barely looked at her as he left. You move in tomorrow. Marcus Stone's mansion sat on a hill overlooking Lake Michigan like a fortress designed to keep the world out. From the street, it looked like something from a magazine. All modern lines and floor-to-ceiling windows that reflected the sky. But as Isabella passed through the electronic gates, she felt the weight of isolation settling on her shoulders. The house was a masterpiece of cold perfection. Every surface gleamed, every angle was precise. Every room looked like it had never been lived in. It was beautiful the way a museum was beautiful. Impressive and completely lifeless. Mrs. Thompson, the housekeeper, met Isabella at the door. She was a stern woman in her 50s with graying hair pulled back severely and eyes that revealed nothing. Miss Martinez, she said formally, Mr. Stone has specific requirements for your stay. She handed Isabella a typed list of rules, each one like a small prison bar. Do not enter Mr. Stone's study under any circumstances. The third floor is strictly forbidden. Only appear in common areas when summoned. No loud noises or disturbances. All meals will be served at designated times. No guests without prior approval. Isabella's room was on the second floor, luxuriously furnished but sterile as a hotel room. Expensive furniture, silk curtains, marble bathroom, but no pictures, no books, no sign that a human being had ever lived there. She set down her single suitcase and sat on the king-sized bed, suddenly overwhelmed by how small she felt in this enormous house. That first night, homesickness hit her like a physical pain. She'd never been away from Diego for more than a few hours, and now she was trapped in this beautiful prison, carrying a stranger's child. She wandered downstairs and found an old grand piano in the living room, the only thing in the house that looked like it had been touched by human hands. Isabella sat at the bench and began to play softly, letting her fingers find a sad melody that expressed all her loneliness and fear. Music had always been her escape, her way of making sense of the world when everything else fell apart. Miss Martinez. Marcus's voice cut through the music like a knife. He stood in the doorway, still in his business suit even though it was past midnight. His face was hard as stone, but Isabella caught something else in his expression. A flicker of pain, as if the music had touched something he'd rather keep buried. "I said no noise in this house," he said, each word clipped and cold. Isabella's hands froze on the keys. "I'm sorry, I couldn't sleep. I don't care about your problems. Follow the rules or leave." As he turned to go, Isabella found her voice. "Why don't you want music in your house?" Marcus stopped, his shoulders tense. For a moment, she thought he might answer. Then he looked back at her with eyes like winter. "Because some things are better left buried." He disappeared into the shadows of the hallway, leaving Isabella alone with the silent piano and the echo of his words. 2 months passed in a routine of careful silence. Isabella ate her meals alone, spent her days reading in her room or walking the grounds when Marcus wasn't home. She called Diego every evening, and his voice growing stronger as the treatment worked gave her the strength to endure Marcus's cold indifference. But Isabella was observant, and she began to notice things about the man who owned this beautiful prison. He worked impossibly long hours, often not coming home until after midnight. She heard him sometimes, pacing in his study, his voice sharp with anger during phone calls. She saw the prescription bottles in the kitchen trash, the medical appointments marked on the calendar Mrs. Thompson thought she couldn't see. Marcus Stone was dying, and he was facing it completely alone. One afternoon, curiosity and a desperate need for human connection led Isabella to the forbidden 3rd floor. At the end of the hallway, she found a door slightly ajar, as if it had been opened recently and not quite closed. Inside was a small room that felt completely different from the rest of the house. Here was dust, warmth, the evidence of a life actually lived. Photo albums sat on a wooden desk, their pages yellowed with time. Paintings leaned against the walls. Unfinished landscapes full of color and life. A wooden box overflowed with handwritten letters tied with ribbon. Isabella picked up one of the photos and gasped. A woman with gentle eyes and a warm smile held a young boy, maybe 5 years old, on her lap. The boy was laughing, his face bright with joy, and for a moment Isabella didn't recognize him. Then she saw the eyes, gray even then, but filled with light instead of ice. She opened one of the letters, her heart racing. "My dearest Marcus, I know the doctors say I don't have long, but I need you to know something. You are the most precious gift life ever gave me. When I'm gone, don't let the world make you hard. Keep your music, keep your gentle heart. Love will find you when you least expect it, and when it does, don't be afraid to let it in. You deserve to be happy, my beautiful boy. You deserve to be loved. All my love forever, Mom." Isabella's eyes filled with tears. The letter was dated 22 years ago. Marcus had lost his mother when he was just 10 years old, the same age Diego had been when their parents died. But unlike Diego, who still had Isabella, Marcus had faced his grief completely alone. She understood then why he'd built walls around his heart, why he couldn't bear music in his house. Every note must remind him of what he'd lost. That evening at dinner, Isabella made a decision. She would try to reach the boy in that photograph, the one who had laughed in his mother's arms before the world taught him that love was dangerous. Marcus sat at the head of the table as always, silently reading emails on his tablet while he ate. Isabella took a deep breath and gathered her courage. "I found a room on the 3rd floor today," she said softly but clearly. "There was a photo of a woman. She looked kind. Was she your mother?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Marcus looked up, his gray eyes flaring with a rage so intense it made Isabella shrink back. "You had no right." His voice was deadly quiet, more frightening than if he'd shouted. "Who do you think you are? You're here for one purpose only, to carry my child and leave. Don't pretend this is anything more than a business arrangement." He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the marble floor. "Stay out of my personal life, Miss Martinez. You know nothing about me, and you never will." Isabella felt tears sting her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Instead, she met his furious gaze with quiet determination. "I'm sorry I invaded your privacy," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "But I think you're wrong about one thing. I think you're not angry that I saw those pictures. I think you're scared that someone finally sees the real you, the person you were before you learned to hide." Marcus said nothing, but she saw his hands tremble slightly before he clenched them into fists. He turned and walked out of the dining room, his footsteps echoing in the vast hallway. Isabella remained seated, her heart pounding. She felt like she'd just touched a live wire. But she didn't regret it. For the first time since she'd arrived, she'd seen Marcus as something other than a cold machine. She'd seen his pain, and her compassionate heart whispered that beneath all that ice was a man who desperately needed to be saved. That night, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Isabella made a silent promise. She would be patient. She would wait. And somehow, she would find a way to reach the lost boy in that photograph. 3 months later, Isabella sat in Dr. Chen's sterile office, her palms sweating as she waited for the results of her latest ultrasound. The pregnancy had been progressing normally, but something in the doctor's expression made her nervous. "Miss Martinez," Dr. Chen said with a smile that transformed his serious face, "I have wonderful news. You're carrying twins, a boy and a girl. Both babies appear to be perfectly healthy." Isabella's hand flew to her belly, tears springing to her eyes. 2 babies, 2 little lives growing inside her. The miracle of it overwhelmed her. In all this darkness and pain, 2 perfect souls were forming, getting ready to enter the world. "Are you sure they're okay?" she whispered. "Their heartbeats are strong. Their development is right on track. You're doing everything right." When Isabella returned to the mansion, she found Marcus in his study, surrounded by financial reports and legal documents. He looked up when she knocked, his expression guarded. "How did the appointment go?" His voice was carefully neutral, but Isabella caught the slight tension in his shoulders. "We're having twins," she said, unable to keep the joy from her voice. "A boy and a girl. They're both healthy." For just a moment, Marcus's careful mask slipped. His eyes widened, and something that might have been wonder flickered across his face. Then the wall slammed back into place. "Good," he said flatly, turning back to his papers. "Twins will ensure the family line continues." His coldness stung. But Isabella had learned to look past his words to what lay beneath. She'd seen that moment of wonder, that flash of something real and human. The next morning, she found sheet music on the piano bench, pages of handwritten notes in Marcus's precise handwriting. At the top, in letters that looked almost hesitant, he'd written, "Lullaby for 2. Isabella's breath caught as she studied the music. The melody was simple but achingly beautiful, full of tenderness and hope. This wasn't the work of a heartless businessman. This was the song of a man who already loved the children he'd never admit to caring about. She sat at the piano and began to play, letting the gentle notes fill the silent house. The lullaby spoke of protection and dreams, of a father's love even if he couldn't voice it. As the last note faded, Isabella looked up to find Marcus standing in the doorway. "Did you write this for them?" she asked softly. Marcus didn't answer directly. Instead, he asked, Would you play it again?" For the first time since she'd arrived, he sat down on the sofa instead of walking away. He kept his eyes fixed on the window, pretending to watch the lake. But Isabella could feel his attention focused entirely on the music. She played the lullaby again, pouring all her hope and love into each note. When she finished, she looked at Marcus and saw something that made her heart skip. His rigid posture had softened, and there were tears he was trying to hide. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice rough with emotion. They should know they were wanted. It was the most honest thing he'd ever said to her. And Isabella felt something shift in her chest. Maybe, just maybe, there was hope for all of them. As Isabella entered her second trimester, something fundamental changed in the mansion. The cold silence began to thaw, replaced by moments of unexpected warmth. It started small, Marcus asking how she felt in the mornings, Mrs. Thompson preparing foods Isabella actually enjoyed, the sound of laughter occasionally echoing through the halls. Isabella began leaving small gifts for Marcus. A cup of coffee prepared just the way he liked it, a sandwich when he worked too late to eat dinner, handwritten notes reminding him to take his medication. She never asked for thanks and rarely received any, but she noticed he always ate the food and took the medicine. One morning, she found him in the kitchen at dawn, staring blankly at the coffee maker as if he'd forgotten how to use it. His face was pale, his hands shaking slightly. "Bad night?" she asked gently, not mentioning the sound she'd heard through the walls, pacing the occasional crash of something being thrown. Marcus looked startled, as if he'd forgotten anyone else lived in the house. "The headaches are getting worse," he admitted, then seemed surprised he'd said it out loud. Without asking permission, Isabella moved to the coffee maker, her movements sure and careful. "My father used to get migraines," she said quietly. Strong coffee and peppermint tea helped sometimes. She prepared both drinks, adding honey to the tea the way her mother had taught her. When she handed them to Marcus, their fingers brushed, and neither of them pulled away immediately. "You don't have to take care of me," Marcus said, but his voice lacked its usual edge. "I know," Isabella replied, meeting his eyes, "but maybe it's okay to let someone try." That afternoon, they took their first walk together in the garden behind the house. The space was larger than Isabella had realized, with winding paths through rose bushes and fruit trees. Everything was perfectly maintained, but somehow lifeless, like a painting of a garden rather than a living space. "Your mother planted some of these, didn't she?" Isabella asked, touching a white rose that seemed older than the others. Marcus stopped walking, his face closing off. But then, after a long moment, he nodded. She loved gardens, said they were proof that beautiful things could grow from dirt and darkness. "She sounds wise." She was. Marcus's voice cracked slightly. "She was the only person who ever loved me unconditionally." Isabella felt tears prick her eyes at the raw pain in his voice. "What happened to her?" "Cancer." "Same as what's?" He couldn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. They walked in silence for a while, and then Isabella asked the question that had been haunting her. "Marcus, if you knew you only had 100 days left to live, what would you want to do?" Marcus stopped walking entirely, turning to stare at her with an expression she couldn't read. "Why would you ask me that?" "Because I think you've been so focused on dying that you've forgotten how to live." His laugh was bitter. What's the point? I'll be gone soon anyway. The point is now, Isabella said fiercely. This moment, this conversation, this breath you're taking right now. Just because something ends doesn't mean it wasn't beautiful while it lasted. Marcus stared at her for a long moment, and Isabella saw something crack in his carefully constructed armor. I don't know how, he whispered. I don't know how to live for anything but work and control and building walls. Then let me teach you, Isabella said, reaching for his hand. This time, he didn't pull away. By the 4th month, the mansion had transformed from a cold museum into something that almost felt like a home. Isabella and Marcus fell into routines that surprised them both. Cooking breakfast together, Marcus's clumsy attempts at chopping vegetables making Isabella laugh so hard she had to sit down. I'm a billionaire, Marcus grumbled, wrestling with a particularly stubborn onion. I shouldn't have to know how to cook. Everyone should know how to feed themselves, Isabella countered, showing him how to hold the knife properly. Besides, your kids are going to need to eat, and I doubt they'll be impressed by your stock portfolio. The word kids slipped out before Isabella could stop it, and they both froze. These weren't supposed to be his children in any real sense. They were part of a contract, a business arrangement. But standing in the warm kitchen, Marcus's hands covered in flour and Isabella's laughter filling the air, it felt like something much more real. They're not really my kids, Marcus said quietly, but there was a question in his voice. They're growing inside me because you wanted them to exist, Isabella replied. That makes them yours in the ways that matter. They went to doctor appointments together now, Marcus insisting on driving and asking detailed questions about nutrition and prenatal care that he tried to disguise as practical concerns. When the ultrasound showed their babies' faces clearly for the first time, Isabella felt Marcus's hand tighten around hers. They're so small, he whispered, staring at the screen with wonder. They're perfect, Isabella whispered back. On weekends, they worked on the nursery together. Marcus had initially planned to hire decorators, but Isabella convinced him to do it themselves. They painted the walls a soft yellow, arguing good-naturedly about whether clouds or stars would make better decorations. Stars, Marcus said firmly. Stars are constant. They're guides. Clouds are soft and dreamy, Isabella countered. They spark imagination. In the end, they painted both. A sky full of soft clouds during the day and glow-in-the-dark stars for nighttime. As they worked, paint somehow ended up everywhere except the walls. Isabella had blue streaks in her hair, and Marcus had yellow handprints on his black t-shirt. You look ridiculous, Isabella laughed, gesturing at his paint-covered clothes. You should see yourself, Marcus replied, but he was smiling. Really smiling, not the cold imitation he wore in business meetings. They collapsed on the floor afterward, backs against the wall, admiring their work. The room looked like children actually might live in it, like it was meant for joy and play and bedtime stories. I never had a room like this, Marcus said quietly. What was your room like? Isabella asked. Different foster homes, different rooms. Most of them were. He paused, seeming to decide how much to reveal. Most of them were temporary. I learned not to get attached to places. Isabella felt her heart break a little more for the lonely boy he'd been. Well, these babies will have a room that's theirs. They'll have consistency. Will they? Marcus asked, and Isabella heard the fear he was trying to hide. What if I'm not here to make sure they do? Isabella turned to face him fully. Then I'll make sure they know their father loved them enough to paint stars on their ceiling. Something shifted in Marcus's expression. Surprise, gratitude, and something deeper that made Isabella's pulse quicken. He reached out and tucked a strand of paint-streaked hair behind her ear, his touch gentle. How do you do that? He asked softly. Do what? Make everything seem possible. Make me believe that maybe I deserve. He didn't finish the sentence, but Isabella understood. She covered his hand with hers, feeling the calluses from their recent garden work, the slight tremor that came with his medication. You deserve to be loved, Marcus. You deserve to be happy. Even after everything I've done? The way I treated you when you first came here? Especially after all that, Isabella said firmly. Pain makes people do cruel things sometimes. It doesn't make them unworthy of love. Marcus stared at her for a long moment, and Isabella saw him fighting an internal battle. Then slowly, he leaned forward and rested his forehead against hers. I'm scared, he whispered. I'm scared of loving you and these babies and then leaving you all behind. I'm scared too, Isabella admitted. But maybe being scared together is better than being scared alone. They stayed like that, breathing the same air, paint-splattered and vulnerable, until the sun set outside their baby's future bedroom window. But not all their moments were peaceful. Marcus's illness progressed in waves. Good days followed by terrible nights when the headaches left him pale and shaking. Isabella would find him gripping the bathroom sink at 3 a.m., his reflection ghostly in the mirror. She never asked permission to help during these episodes. She would simply appear with cool cloths and water, sitting beside him on the bathroom floor until the worst passed. You don't have to stay, he would whisper, hating that she saw him weak. Yes, I do, she would whisper back, and gradually he stopped protesting. One particularly bad night, Marcus collapsed in the hallway outside his bedroom. Isabella heard the crash and ran to find him unconscious, blood trickling from where his head had hit the marble floor. She called 911 with shaking hands, then sat beside him until the paramedics arrived, stroking his hair and whispering that he had to be okay, that she needed him, that their babies needed him. At the hospital, while doctors ran tests and adjusted medications, Isabella sat in the waiting room and finally admitted the truth she'd been avoiding. She was completely, desperately in love with Marcus Stone. Not the cold businessman who had hired her, but the man who painted stars on nursery ceilings and wrote lullabies he was too afraid to sing. When Marcus woke up and saw her red-rimmed eyes, he tried to make a joke. You look terrible. You're not exactly winning any beauty contests yourself, Isabella shot back, but her voice was thick with tears. Isabella, Marcus said seriously, you don't have to do this. If it gets worse, if I become too much of a burden. Stop, Isabella interrupted fiercely. Don't you dare try to push me away now. We're in this together, remember? Scared together is better than scared alone. Marcus nodded, unable to speak around the emotion in his throat. For the first time in his adult life, he wasn't facing the darkness alone. The morning that changed everything started like so many others. Marcus struggling with medication-induced nausea, while Isabella tried to coax him into eating breakfast. But then Dr. Patterson called with news that made them both freeze. Marcus, I need you both to come in today. The latest scans show something unexpected. They drove to the hospital in tense silence, both afraid to hope, both terrified of more bad news. Dr. Patterson met them in his office, a thick folder in his hands and an expression Isabella had never seen before, excitement mixed with cautious optimism. Marcus, he said without preamble, your tumor has stopped growing. In fact, it appears to be shrinking slightly. This is extremely rare, but there's more. There's a new experimental surgery being performed at Johns Hopkins. It's risky, but given your improvement, you're now a candidate. Isabella felt the world tilt around her. She gripped Marcus's hand so tightly she was probably cutting off circulation, but he was gripping back just as hard. What are you saying? Marcus asked, his voice barely a whisper. I'm saying you have a real chance at survival. A good chance. The office exploded into emotion. Isabella burst into tears, months of suppressed fear and hope pouring out in great, gasping sobs. Marcus sat frozen for a moment, then pulled her into his arms, both of them crying and laughing and holding each other like they might disappear. We're going to live, Isabella whispered against his chest. We're going to have a future. I can't believe it, Marcus said, his voice thick with tears. I thought I was dying alone, and now you're going to live, and you won't be alone. Instead of going straight home, they drove to the lakefront and walked along the shore. Isabella had never seen Marcus like this. His face open and bright, his step lighter, his hand secure in hers. I want to take the kids to the beach, he said suddenly. I want to teach them to build sandcastles and look for shells. I want to see their first steps and hear their first words. You will, Isabella promised. All of that and more. They talked about the future for the first time. Really talked about it, making plans instead of just hoping. Marcus wanted to scale back his work, spend more time at home. Isabella wanted to go back to music, maybe teach piano to children. They wanted to travel, to show their kids the world, to build a life full of love and laughter. I want to marry you, Marcus said suddenly, stopping in the middle of the path. Isabella's heart skipped a beat. What? I want to marry you, he repeated, turning to face her fully. Not because of the babies, not because of any contract. Because I love you, Isabella. Because you saved my life in every way a person can be saved. Tears spilled down Isabella's cheeks as she threw her arms around his neck. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you. They kissed there on the lakefront, with the sun setting behind them and hope spreading through their hearts like warmth after a long winter. But their happiness was fragile, built on the shifting ground of medical uncertainty. The surgery was scheduled for the following month, and both of them knew that everything could still change in an instant. 3 days before Marcus's surgery, Isabella decided to surprise him at his office with lunch. She'd spent the morning cooking his favorite meal, chicken parmesan with homemade pasta, wanting to remind him that he had something wonderful to come home to. Stone Industries' lobby was as intimidating as ever, all black marble and sharp angles. But Isabella felt lighter as she rode the elevator to the 65th floor. Soon, this would all be behind them. Soon, they would be a real family. Marcus's secretary, Jennifer, smiled when she saw Isabella approach with the covered dishes. He's in his office, Miss Martinez. You can go right in. But as Isabella approached the office door, she heard voices inside. Marcus's familiar deep tone and a woman's voice, sultry and confident. Through the slightly open door, Isabella saw her, Victoria Hastings, Marcus's ex-girlfriend, the one who had left him when he was first diagnosed. Victoria was everything Isabella wasn't: tall blonde, elegant in the way that only came with generations of privilege. She was leaning over Marcus's desk, her manicured hand on his shoulder, her voice intimate and persuasive. Marcus, darling, I heard about the surgery. I know I made a terrible mistake when I left, but I was scared. Now that you're going to be okay, maybe we could start over? We were so good together before all this medical drama. Isabella's heart stopped. She pressed herself against the wall outside the door, the lunch containers trembling in her hands. Then she heard Marcus's voice, cold and businesslike. Victoria, you need to understand something. Yes, I hired Isabella to carry my child. She was part of a contract, but that doesn't mean. Isabella didn't wait to hear the rest. Those words, part of a contract, hit her like physical blows. All their moments together, all the tenderness and growing love she thought they'd shared, reduced to a business arrangement in front of his real girlfriend. She set the lunch containers on a nearby table and fled, her vision blurred with tears. The elevator couldn't come fast enough. By the time she reached the lobby, she was sobbing openly, drawing stares from the perfectly dressed business people in their perfectly ordered world. Back in the office, Marcus was finishing his sentence. That doesn't mean I don't love her more than I ever thought possible. Isabella isn't just carrying my child, Victoria. She's the woman I want to spend the rest of my life with, however long that might be. What we had is over. What I have with her is forever. But Isabella was already gone, her heart shattered on the marble floor of his building. At the mansion, Isabella packed her few belongings with mechanical precision. She was good at this. She'd done it before when her parents died, when she'd had to give up her dreams for Diego's medical bills. She knew how to wrap up a life and move on. She left a note on the dining room table where Marcus would find it. "Thank you for everything. The surgery will go well. I believe that. I'll make sure the babies are born safely, and I won't ask for anything beyond what we agreed. Please don't look for me. It's better this way. Isabella." She took one last look at the piano where she'd played his lullabies, at the nursery they'd painted together, at the garden where they'd talked about the future. Then she walked out the front door, closing it quietly behind her. Isabella checked into a small motel on the south side of Chicago, not far from where she'd grown up. The room was tiny and shabby, but it felt honest in a way the mansion never had. She called Diego to let him know she was okay, listened to his excited chatter about his improving health, and tried to convince herself she'd made the right choice. But that night, alone in the narrow bed, she placed her hands on her growing belly and whispered to her babies. Marcus arrived home that evening with flowers and Isabella's favorite chocolate, ready to tell her about Victoria's pathetic attempt to win him back and how firmly he'd rejected her. He'd spent the afternoon thinking about their future, about the surgery that would give them decades together instead of months. But the mansion felt wrong the moment he walked in. Too quiet, too cold, like it had been before Isabella filled it with music and laughter and life. He found her note on the dining room table, and the words hit him like a physical blow. She thought he'd been talking about her as just a contract employee. She didn't know that he'd told Victoria she was the love of his life. Mrs. Thompson appeared in the doorway, her usually stern face creased with worry. "She left around noon, Mr. Stone." She was crying. Marcus crumpled the note in his fist, rage and desperation warring in his chest. "Did she say where she was going?" "No, sir. But she took the bus toward the south side." Marcus was in his car within minutes, driving through Isabella's old neighborhood, checking every motel, every apartment building, every place she might have gone. But Chicago was a big city, and Isabella Martinez had learned how to disappear. For 3 days he searched. He hired private investigators, called every contact he had, even swallowed his pride and asked Diego where his sister might be. But Diego was recovering from treatment and had no idea Isabella had left the mansion. On the 4th day, the day before his surgery, Marcus sat in his empty study and stared at the contract that had started it all. $5 million for a baby. Simple, clean, businesslike. He'd been so proud of his practical solution to the problem of mortality. Now he understood what Isabella had tried to tell him months ago. Some things couldn't be reduced to contracts and payments. Love couldn't be bought or sold or negotiated. And he'd lost the most precious thing in his life, because he'd been too much of a coward to tell the world what she meant to him. Isabella went into labor on a rainy Tuesday morning, exactly 8 months after signing Marcus's contract. She was alone in her motel room, gripping the thin bedsheets as contractions built like waves, trying to decide if she was brave enough to call for help. She'd been managing her pregnancy through a free clinic, using a false name, paying cash for everything. The babies were healthy. That was all that mattered. In a few hours, she would give birth to 2 beautiful children, hand them over to their father, and disappear from their lives forever. But as another contraction seized her, stronger than the others, Isabella realized she couldn't do this alone. Not just physically, emotionally. These babies deserved to be born surrounded by love, not in a sterile hospital room with no one who cared about them. With shaking fingers, she dialed the one number she'd memorized but never called. "Marcus," she whispered when he answered on the first ring. "Isabella, thank God. Where are you? I've been looking everywhere." "I'm in labor," she interrupted. South Chicago General Hospital. Room 314. I'm on my way. Marcus broke every traffic law getting to the hospital. His surgery had been postponed when Isabella disappeared. He'd refused to have the operation until he knew she and the babies were safe. Now, racing through hospital corridors, he realized that nothing else mattered except getting to her in time. He burst into room 314 to find Isabella gripping the bed rails, her face pale with pain and exhaustion. She looked up when he entered, and despite everything, her eyes filled with relief. "You came," she whispered. "Of course I came." Marcus took her hand, not caring that she was sweating and disheveled, and nothing like the polished women he'd dated before. She was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. "I love you, Isabella. I've been trying to tell you that for days. But Victoria is nothing to me," Marcus said fiercely. "Less than nothing. I told her that you're the woman I love, that you're my future, that what we had was meaningless compared to what I have with you." Isabella's eyes widened. "You said that. I said that and more. I would have said it to the whole world if I'd known you needed to hear it." Another contraction hit, stronger than before, and Isabella squeezed Marcus's hand so hard he thought she might break his fingers. But he held on, whispering encouragement and love and promises about their future. "I'm scared," Isabella gasped between contractions. "I'm here," Marcus said. "We're doing this together." At 11:47 p.m., Elena Rose Stone entered the world, screaming her indignation at being removed from her warm cocoon. 3 minutes later, her brother Michael James followed, quieter but just as perfect. Isabella held her daughter while Marcus cradled his son, both of them crying and laughing and staring in wonder at the tiny faces they'd helped create. "They're so small," Marcus whispered, just as he had during the ultrasound months ago. "They're perfect," Isabella replied, just as she had then. The babies were healthy and strong, with Isabella's dark hair and what looked like Marcus's gray eyes. Elena gripped her father's finger with surprising strength, while Michael seemed content to sleep against his mother's chest. "I want to marry you," Marcus said again, looking up from his son's face. "Not because of them, not because of any obligation, because I can't imagine my life without you in it." "The surgery," Isabella began, "is scheduled for next week. And whether it works or not, I want to spend whatever time I have as your husband." Isabella felt tears slip down her cheeks. "What if something goes wrong? What if? Then we'll face it together," Marcus said firmly. "Scared together, remember? It's better than scared alone." They were married 4 days later in Isabella's hospital room, with Diego as their witness and the twins sleeping in their bassinets nearby. Marcus wore a hospital gown over his surgical prep clothes, and Isabella wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Thompson had brought from the mansion. It wasn't the wedding either of them had dreamed of as children, but it was perfect, full of love and hope and the promise of whatever future they could build together. Marcus's surgery lasted 14 hours. Isabella spent that time in the surgical waiting room, the twins in portable carriers beside her, surrounded by the family that had somehow formed around their unconventional beginning. Diego sat beside her, his own health restored thanks to the medical bills Marcus had paid without question. Mrs. Thompson brought coffee and sandwiches that no one ate. Even Jennifer from Marcus's office appeared, clutching flowers and stammering apologies for not recognizing how much Isabella meant to her boss. When Dr. Patterson finally emerged, still in his surgical scrubs, his face was exhausted but triumphant. "We got it all," he said simply. "The tumor is gone. Marcus will need months of recovery, but there's every reason to believe he'll make a full recovery." Isabella collapsed into Diego's arms, sobbing with relief and joy and exhaustion. They were going to have their future after all. Marcus woke up 2 days later to find Isabella asleep in the chair beside his bed, Elena in her arms and Michael in a bassinet nearby. For a moment, he thought he was dreaming, The scene was too perfect, too much like the happiness he'd never dared to hope for. "Hey," Isabella whispered when she saw him watching them. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been hit by a truck," Marcus admitted. "But also like the luckiest man alive." Isabella moved carefully to the bed, Elena still sleeping in her arms. "Someone wants to meet her daddy properly." Marcus's hands shook as he held his daughter. This tiny person who carried his DNA and Isabella's fierce spirit. Elena opened her eyes, definitely gray like his, and seemed to study his face with serious concentration. "Hello, sweetheart," Marcus whispered. "I'm your dad. I love you so much already." The recovery was long and difficult. There were setbacks and complications. Days when Marcus was too weak to hold the babies and nights when Isabella wondered if they'd beaten the odds only to lose each other to the slower cruelty of chronic illness. But there were also moments of pure joy. The first time Elena smiled, really smiled, not just gas. She was looking at Marcus, and his face lit up like sunrise. The first time Michael laughed, it was at Isabella playing peekaboo with a hospital blanket. They went home to the mansion 6 weeks after the surgery. Marcus still weak, but healing. The babies growing stronger every day. The house that had once felt like a museum now rang with crying and laughter, and lullabies played on the piano. 1 year later, Isabella sat at the piano in the early morning light, playing softly while Elena and Michael had their morning nap. The lullaby Marcus had written for them was still her favorite. Simple and beautiful and full of the love he'd been too afraid to voice when he first composed it. "They're still asleep?" Marcus asked, appearing in the doorway with 2 cups of coffee. "For now," Isabella smiled, accepting her cup gratefully. But Elena's starting to stir. "She'll want breakfast soon." Marcus sat beside her on the piano bench, and they enjoyed a few moments of quiet togetherness before their day began in earnest. These peaceful moments were precious. With twins, quiet time was a rare commodity. "I have something for you," Marcus said, pulling a small wrapped box from his pocket. "It's not my birthday," Isabella protested, but she was already opening the gift with curious fingers. Inside was a simple silver locket, heart-shaped and delicate. When she opened it, she found 2 tiny photos, Elena on one side, Michael on the other, both sleeping peacefully. "It's beautiful," Isabella whispered. "There's an inscription," Marcus said, suddenly nervous. Isabella turned the locket over and read the engraved words. "Love multiplies when shared. Forever yours, M." "Marcus," she breathed, tears pricking her eyes. "I know we started this whole thing as a business arrangement," Marcus said, taking her hands in his. "But somewhere along the way, you became my whole world. You and the babies. You're everything I never knew I needed." Isabella kissed him softly, tasting coffee and morning and the promise of all their tomorrows. "I love you too, more than I ever thought possible." From upstairs came the sound of Elena's demanding cry, soon joined by Michael's more patient but equally insistent voice. "Duty calls," Isabella laughed, standing to go to their children. "I'll come with you," Marcus said, following her toward the stairs. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do," Marcus said, echoing the words Isabella had spoken to him during his darkest nights. "We're in this together, remember?" The birthday party was in full swing in the mansion's back garden, now transformed from a sterile showplace into a real family space. Elena, now 5 years old and every bit as fierce as her mother, was organizing the other children into some elaborate game that seemed to involve a lot of running and shrieking with joy. Michael, quieter like his father but with Isabella's warm heart, sat beside Marcus at the piano, carefully picking out the melody of Happy Birthday, with chubby fingers that showed real musical promise. Isabella watched from the kitchen window as she finished decorating the cake, an elaborate creation shaped like a castle that had taken her most of the morning to complete. Diego, now 20 and healthy, helped her with the final touches, his art student's eye for detail making all the difference. "You know," Diego said, adding the last pink sugar flower to the castle walls. I never thought I'd see my sister this happy. Even with all the chaos? Isabella asked, gesturing toward the window where Elena was now leading a parade of children through the rose bushes. Especially with all the chaos, Diego smiled. You were so serious after Mom and Dad died. I worried you'd forgotten how to be young. Isabella looked out at her family. Marcus patiently helping Michael with a difficult passage. Elena racing toward the house with grass stains on her party dress and joy written across her face. Friends and neighbors and the family they'd built filling their home with love and laughter. I never forgot, she said softly. I just needed to find the right reason to remember. As if he could feel her watching him, Marcus looked up from the piano and caught her eye through the window. Even after 5 years of marriage, 6 years since they'd first met, he could still make her heart skip with just a smile. He was completely healthy now, the surgery a distant memory, but neither of them took a single day for granted. He mouthed, I love you, across the distance, and Isabella mouthed it back. The words as true and powerful as they'd been that first night when she'd played his lullaby and seen past his walls to the man beneath. Come on, Diego said, lifting the finished cake. Let's go make some birthday wishes come true. As they walked toward the garden, cake held high, Isabella reflected on the strange journey that had brought her here. She'd signed a contract to carry a stranger's child for money, expecting nothing but a business transaction. Instead, she'd found love, family, and a future brighter than any she'd dared to dream. Marcus met them at the garden door, Michael in his arms, Elena racing ahead to see her castle cake. As their friends and family gathered around, singing happy birthday, with voices full of joy, Isabella felt the perfect contentment of a woman who had found her place in the world. The twins blew out their candles together, Elena's wishes elaborate and dramatic, Michael's whispered and private. But Isabella already knew what she would wish for if those candles were hers. Let this last forever. Let us always be this happy, this grateful, this aware of how miraculous it is to love and be loved in return. As the sun set over Lake Michigan and the party wound down, the Stone family sat together on their porch swing, Marcus and Isabella with their arms around each other, Elena and Michael curled up between them, Diego stretched out on the nearby hammock, everyone tired and happy and home. Mama, Elena said sleepily, tell us the story again. Which story, sweetheart? The story about how you and Daddy fell in love. Isabella and Marcus exchanged amused glances. This had become Elena's favorite bedtime story, though they always edited out the more complicated parts for young ears. Well, Isabella began, once upon a time, there was a very sad man who lived alone in a big empty house, and a brave woman who needed to save her brother, Michael added, knowing the story by heart. And they made a deal, Elena continued dramatically. But then they fell in love for real. The best kind of love, Marcus said, kissing the top of his daughter's head. The kind that grows when you're not expecting it. The kind that saves you, Isabella added, meeting her husband's eyes over their children's heads. As the stars came out over Chicago, the Stone family headed inside their warm, music-filled home, carrying with them the perfect piece of people who had found exactly where they belonged. The heartless deal had become something infinitely more precious, a love story that would last forever.